The chains cut into the flesh of her wrists. Blood mingled with salt water. The most powerful man in Bayanera was drowning, betrayed by his own best friend, and Elena Torres had only 10 seconds to decide. To jump meant certain death. To stay meant living with the guilt forever. But when lightning ripped across the sky and illuminated that bloodied face, she recognized him. The only man who had ever treated her like a human being. The only one who had stopped her boss from beating her. Vittorio Santini was sinking, and the bubbles stopped. Her heart beat once, twice. Then she jumped. The water swallowed her like a liquid tomb. The cold instantly stole her breath, but her hands found the chains, and she pulled. Because some souls deserve to be saved, even when all hell is about to break loose. And the next day, 200 armed men surrounded her restaurant, not to kill her, but to protect her. This is the story of how an invisible waitress saved the king of the underworld, and how he declared war on the entire world for her. The sea was furious that night. Black waves crashed against the rocks with a violence that seemed to have a life of its own, as if the ocean were determined to devour everything that dared to defy it. The wind cut through the skin like invisible blades, bringing with it the bitter taste of salt and the premonition of death. Elena Torres had never seen a man drown. But that night, under the flickering light of a lamppost that threatened to go out at any moment, she witnessed something that would change her life forever. His body struggled against the currents, but it was useless. The waves were relentless, pulling him down with brutal force, as if the ocean itself had a score to settle with that man. He was chained, his hands bound behind his back with thick chains that gleamed in the dim light. Blood streamed from his face, mixing with the salt water, turning the white foam a sinister red. His suit, once impeccable, was now torn and stained. An expensive suit, she noticed, the kind powerful men used. Men who shouldn't be dying on deserted beaches in the middle of the night. Every instinct in Elena's body screamed for her to run, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. To go back to the restaurant, clean the tables, count her meager tips, and forget that night as if it were just another nightmare. She was just a waitress, invisible, disposable, someone who served food and kept her mouth shut. Intelligent people didn't meddle in the affairs of dangerous men. But then, a lightning bolt ripped through the dark sky, illuminating everything for a fraction of a second. And in that brief flash, she saw his face, Vittorio Santini. The name came to her mind like thunder, the only man who, 3 months ago, had stopped her boss from unfairly firing her, the only man who, on that terrible night at the Maria Blue restaurant, had looked at her not as a servant, but as a person. He had told the restaurant owner, in that deep, authoritative voice that made people obey without question, "You don't break what you serve with loyalty. She works hard. Respect that." Now that same man was sinking. Bubbles of air escaped his lips in an increasingly desperate rhythm, like prayers that would never be answered. Elena's hands trembled as she dropped her old bag onto the wet sand. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She kicked off her worn shoes, feeling the cold, damp sand between her toes. And before she could think twice, before reason could stop her, she ran into the sea. The water enveloped her like an icy serpent. The cold was so intense that it stole the air from her lungs immediately. The waves pushed her, pulled her, tried to drag her back to the beach or to the bottom of the ocean. Elena swam with all her might, her muscles burning, her lungs begging for air. The darkness was absolute beneath the surface. She couldn't see anything, only feel the churning water, the raging currents, the weight of fear in her chest. Her fingers first found the fabric of his jacket, then the chain. The metal was icy, cutting her palms as she gripped it. But she pulled. God, how she pulled. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her chest was about to explode. The world was reduced to just this. Pull, breathe, pull, don't let go. Words escaped her lips in a desperate whisper she wasn't even sure she was saying aloud. Not you, Mr. Santini. Not for doing the right thing. When she finally managed to drag him to the beach, her arms gave way. Elena collapsed beside him on the sand, gasping and trembling so violently her teeth chattered. His pulse pounded weakly beneath her fingertips, like a wounded bird. But it was there. He was alive. Barely, but alive. She pressed her trembling hands against his chest, feeling the shallow rises and falls, and tears mingled with the salt water on her face. Please don't die. You don't deserve to die. Not you. She didn't know if he could hear her. She didn't know if he cared. But she said it anyway, like a prayer, as she dragged his inert body to the shelter of the rocks, hiding it from the sight of whoever had tried to kill him. Hello, dear souls. Thank you so much for being here and supporting this channel. Your presence means the world to me. If you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Comment below where you're listening from. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. At dawn, the world had completely changed. Elena woke to the sound of engines, lots of them. The roar reverberated through the narrow streets of Nera, the small coastal town where she lived, shaking the windows of her tiny apartment. As she staggered to the window, still wearing the same wet and dirty clothes from the night before, her blood ran cold. 200 men surrounded the Marea Blue restaurant where she worked. Black luxury cars blocked the entire street in both directions, engines rumbling low like sleeping animals ready to pounce. Men in dark suits were positioned in military formation, weapons visible in their holsters but pointed outwards, protecting the perimeter. The very air seemed to vibrate with danger, with contained violence about to explode. Elena stood at the window barefoot, her hair still damp, and for a terrible moment she couldn't breathe. This was it. They had come to finish what the ocean had started, to eliminate witnesses, to ensure that no one knew what had happened on the beach. But then a man stepped forward from the crowd, his face marked by old scars, his eyes cold but respectful, and her voice carried something that seemed almost incredulous. Our boss, Vittorio Santini, is alive. The waitress saved him. Words reverberated among the assembled men like wind in a wheat field. Heads turned to her. Some faces showed confusion. Others, something that seemed strangely reverent. And that's when Elena realized she hadn't just saved a man. She had resurrected a war. 4 years. Elena had worked at the Marea Blue for 4 long years, and in that time she had learned the most important skill for survival: how to be invisible. She was the waitress who saw too much and spoke too little. She served the customers, cleaned the tables until they shone, learned which tables to avoid when certain men appeared. She had become an expert at reading the temperature of a room, at knowing when to serve another round of wine, and when to disappear into the shadows. Luciano Moretti, the restaurant owner, ruled his small empire with cruelty, disguised as charm. He never smiled without ulterior motives. Every gesture was calculated, every word a potential threat. But there was one person who could make him back down, one person whose opinion seemed to matter. Vittorio Santini, his silent partner, his protector, and in many ways, his superior. A man as feared as he was respected, whose reputation preceded him like a deadly shadow. Elena remembered that night, 3 months ago, when Vittorio had stopped Luciano in the middle of a tantrum. She had dropped a tray, an accident. Her fingers were slippery from carrying heavy dishes, but Luciano's reaction was immediate. He grabbed her arm, his grip painful, his other hand raised to strike. You're clumsy, incompetent. You don't win loyalty with fear, Vittorio said, his voice cutting through the room like thunder wrapped in silk. He hadn't moved from his seat in the corner of the restaurant, hadn't even raised his voice, but Luciano froze. She's just a waitress. Luciano spat the words, but his hand fell. She's a person, Vittorio had corrected, his gray eyes firm, unwavering. And she works hard. Breaking her spirit won't make you work better. It will only scare her. Scared people make mistakes. That single moment was etched into Elena's memory. She had met Vittorio for only a second, enough time to see something unexpected. Not pity, not even kindness exactly, just recognition, as if he truly saw her as human. After that night, she noticed him more, the way he carried himself with a kind of weary authority, how his men followed him out of respect, not terror, how he seemed tired of violence, even though he was a master of it. Weeks later, Vittorio returned to Marea Blue, this time for what Luciano called a business meeting. Elena served the wine that night, silent and discreet as always, but she couldn't ignore the tension that was building in the air like toxic smoke. Luciano leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, his eyes gleaming with something that made Elena's stomach churn. You've been very gentle lately, Vittorio. It's becoming a problem. Vittorio's expression didn't change. What problem? That detective, Alessandro Ricci. He's investigating our operations thoroughly, asking questions about the shipments. I need him gone. You mean the one who doesn't accept your money? Vittorio's tone was controlled. The one with a family, 2 young daughters. I don't care if he has 10 daughters. He's a problem. I won't touch him. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena, pouring wine at the sideboard, felt her hands begin to tremble. Luciano's smile was sharp as broken glass. "So you're against me?" "No, Luciano." Vittorio carefully lowered his glass. "I'm above you." That sentence sealed his fate. Elena saw in Luciano's eyes a flash of pure fury, followed by cold calculation. She had seen that look before, long before someone disappeared without a trace. 3 days later, while cleaning the second-floor office, she overheard the whispered conversation. "Meeting on the beach, just to talk, sort things out," they said. Reconciliation. But Elena had worked there long enough to know what reconciliation meant. She saw the weapons being prepared. She noticed the chains in the trunk of a car. She had learned to recognize the smell of lies. She tried to warn him. She left an anonymous note in Vittorio's car. She tried to speak to one of his bodyguards. But waitresses don't get audiences with kings. Her warnings were ignored, dismissed, crumpled, and thrown away. So she followed. Through the cold rain, keeping her distance, she watched Luciano Moretti, once her ally, order Vittorio Santini's execution. She hid among the rocks as they wrapped chains around his wrists, as they beat him until he was unrecognizable, as they threw him into the ocean like disposable trash. She watched the bubbles rise, and then she jumped. Morning arrived like a sharp, golden blade, ready to cut through everything that came before. Elena stood at the window of her friend Sophia's small apartment, still processing the surreal sight outside. A convoy of black cars stretched down the street like a funeral procession in reverse. Men in various states of alert kept watch, some smoking, some checking weapons, all guarding the building as if it contained something precious. Inside, in the small room Sophia had offered, Vittorio Santini sat leaning against the headboard, looking like death on vacation. One arm was bandaged with strips torn from Sophia's clean sheets. The other held a glass of whiskey as if it were the only thing anchoring him to consciousness. His face was still bruised, purple and yellow blooming across his jawline, fresh spots on his temples courtesy of Elena's trembling but determined hands. But his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, were awake again, alert, planning. "They're yours," Elena said softly, still staring at the small army outside. "They were," Vittorio corrected, his voice rough as gravel, "until Luciano killed half of them and bought the rest with fear and empty promises." He began to rise, moving as if every muscle protested, and Elena instinctively rushed to support him. His body was hot beneath her palms, very hot, still burning with fever, but her pulse was strong now, fierce. "You shouldn't move. You shouldn't have saved me," he murmured, looking at her. His expression was complex, full of layers she couldn't decipher. "But I'm glad you did." Their eyes met, and for the first time, the silence between them wasn't born of fear or social hierarchy, or the vast chasm between their positions in life. It was something far more dangerous. Recognition, connection, a spark of something neither of them had time for, but couldn't completely ignore. The moment stretched, fragile as blown glass, until heavy footsteps on the balcony shattered it. Vittorio's right-hand man, Marco, a robust man with scarred knuckles and surprisingly gentle eyes, entered without knocking, holding an envelope as if it were explosive. "De Moretti," he said simply. Vittorio ripped open the envelope with more violence than necessary. Inside was a single, slightly grainy photograph, taken from across the street. Elena carrying shopping bags, her face clear and carefree. She felt her blood run cold. Vittorio turned the photo over. On the back, written in red ink that looked disturbingly like blood, "Give back what is mine, or I will take you piece by piece." The room became very, very silent. "He knows I saved you," Elena whispered. Her voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Vittorio's expression changed, the warmth vanishing in an instant, replaced by something harder, colder, utterly ruthless. "He won't touch you," he said, his voice low as distant thunder. "You can't promise that." "I can." He turned to Marco, and his tone became steely. "Prepare the men, all who are still loyal. No mercy, no negotiation, no half measures." "Vittorio," Marco began, obvious concern. "Do it." Elena found her voice, though it trembled. "You can't go to war, not like this. You've barely recovered. It's too soon." Vittorio looked at her as if she were the last thing worth fighting for in a world that had lost all its luster. "I'm not going to war because I'm ready, Elena. I'm going to war because he threatened you." He paused, something raw and fleeting crossing his face. "For you, I would go to hell itself." The words hung in the air between them. heavy with meaning, with promise, with an intensity that changed everything. By nightfall, Bayanera was in chaos. Elena watched everything unfold on the small television in Sofia's apartment, where she had been taken for safety. News helicopters flew overhead, shrouding columns of black smoke. Reporters stammered as they gave updates on gang violence and turf wars ravaging the city's criminal underworld like wildfire. Moretti's hideouts exploded one by one. Not literally, though there were fires. Vittorio's men swept through with brutal efficiency, reclaiming territory, extracting loyalty with methods Elena tried not to think too much about. Every victory had a price, and that price was blood. She sat on Sofia's worn sofa, arms around her knees, her heart torn between awe and terror. This was happening because of her. People were dying, because she pulled a man from the ocean. "Stop it," Sofia said, watching her expression. "You saved a good man from a bad death. What he does with that second chance is his choice, not your fault." But it felt like her fault. It felt like she'd pulled the pin on a grenade and was watching the explosion in slow motion. When Vittorio returned near dawn, he looked as if he had walked through fire. His face was stretched and his clothes were soiled. His bandages needed changing. There was blood on his hands. It wasn't his, she realized with a start, and the fury still burned in his eyes like embers that refused to go out. Elena rushed to him despite herself, despite everything. "Please, stop this. Let it go. Those people who died tonight, they died because of me." "No." His voice cracked like a whip. He held her chin, not forcefully, but firmly enough to make her look into his eyes. "Don't you dare blame yourself. You didn't start this war. I did. The day I was stupid enough to trust a man like Luciano Moretti. The day I thought honor meant something to him. He tried to pull away, but she held his hand, her voice breaking. "Vittorio, stop before there's nothing left of you to save. Please, I can't watch you destroy yourself. I've already died once, Elena." His thumb brushed against her knuckles, almost tender, despite the violence that still haunted him. "The ocean took the man I was. What came back is something else, something that won't let you get hurt." Her grip on his hand tightened. The words came out as a whisper. "Please, Vittorio." He didn't answer with words. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, breathless, full of sadness and gratitude and something that felt like a farewell. The kind of kiss that's born between two people who know that tomorrow may not come, who have seen too much death to pretend. When they made love that night, it was tender and fierce at the same time. Hands learning skin, breaths mingling with whispered promises that neither of them was sure they could keep. Then, lying wrapped in the sheets, Vittorio pulled her close, skin to skin, forehead against hers. "If Moretti comes after you," he murmured, "you'll find me waiting. And if he kills you," she said, pressing her flat hand against his chest, feeling his steady, strong, stubborn heartbeat, "then you'll have to get me out of there again." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It wasn't a smile, but almost. She almost laughed. Instead, he just gripped her tighter and tried not to think about the war that was still raging outside. 4 days later, Marco burst through the door of the safe house with news that paralyzed Elena's heart. "They got Sofia," he said, breathing heavily, as if he'd run the whole way. No, no, no. Sofia, her only friend. The person who helped pull Vittorio from the ocean, who stitched up his wounds with trembling hands, who risked everything to help a stranger. "Where?" Vittorio demanded, already reaching for his gun. "Portovello warehouse, the abandoned one on Colombo Street." Marco's face was grim. "Moretti says he wants Elena in return. Sunset. Come alone or he'll kill the girl." Elena turned to Vittorio. Her decision was already made. "Let me go." "No way." Her voice was monotone. "Absolute. He won't stop. He'll hurt her. He'll kill her just to prove a point. And it'll be my fault. And that's exactly why you're not even going near that warehouse." He held her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him. "Moretti is using her as bait. He wants you both dead. I'm not going to give him what he wants. And then we end this tonight. Once and for all." His jaw clenched with determination. He wants a confrontation. He'll get one. Just not the one he's expecting. The Portovello warehouse smelled of rust, gasoline, and old violence. Empty, except for echoes and shadows that seemed to breathe in the dim light. Sofia was tied to a chair in the center of the space, bruised but alive, tears streaming down her face. Duct tape covered her mouth. Her eyes widened when she saw Elena hiding behind a pillar near the entrance. Luciano Moretti stood beside her like a spider admiring its web. He looked as always, well-dressed, well-groomed, smiling. That smile that meant someone was about to suffer. "You should have stayed dead, Vittorio." Moretti's voice echoed through the warehouse. Vittorio emerged from the shadows behind a stack of crates, gun in hand, his men spreading behind him like a dark tide. "You should have remained loyal." "Loyal?" Moretti laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "To what? To your outdated sense of honor? Your pathetic moral code? This is business, Vittorio. You were getting weak. All because of a conscientious sheriff and a waitress with pretty eyes. She's more human than you ever were." Vittorio's voice was firm, but Elena could feel the tension in his shoulders, the way his finger rested on the trigger. Moretti's smile widened. All this for a maid. How romantic, how utterly stupid. Then everything exploded. Gunfire erupted from all directions. Men screaming, bullets tearing through metal, wood, and flesh. Elena ducked behind the column, hands over her ears, praying more fervently than she ever had before. The noise was deafening. The flashes of gunfire illuminated the darkness like strobe lights. She watched Vittorio move through the chaos, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, taking down Moretti's men with brutal efficiency. When the shooting finally ceased, the silence was almost worse. Elena looked around the column, her ears ringing. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, some moving, others not. Smoke hung in the air like fog. Moretti was still standing, leaning against a pillar, one hand pressed against the side where blood trickled between his fingers. But he was smiling. "You can't kill me, Vittorio," he said, breathing heavily. "You need me. The others won't follow you without my approval. I'm too important, too connected." Vittorio walked toward him slowly, gun still in hand. His expression was almost peaceful. "No," he said softly. "I need peace." The shot echoed like thunder. Moretti's expression shifted from confidence to surprise as he collapsed to the ground. For a moment, everything stood still, the warehouse holding its breath, until Elena screamed. Because Vittorio had been hit too. Blood gushed from his shoulder, spreading darkness across his shirt. He staggered, clinging to a crate, and Elena was running before he could think, sliding across the concrete to catch him before he fell. "No, no, no, Vittorio, stay with me. I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth, his face too pale. "Sophia, get Sophia out of here." Marco was already cutting the ropes, pulling the sobbing girl to her feet. Other men secured the warehouse, searching bodies, making sure no threat remained. But Elena only had eyes for Vittorio. Again, for the blood on his hands, for the way he was breathing so shallowly. "You're not going to die," she told him fiercely, pressing her hands against the wound as if she could keep it whole by sheer willpower alone. "Do you hear me? You're not going to die. Not after all this. I won't leave you." He smiled, really smiled, even as his eyes began to lose focus. "For a waitress, you're very bossy. Shut up. Save your energy. Help is on the way. Hold on. Please, Vittorio. Please, hold on." His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "Elena, don't you dare say goodbye. Don't you dare." Days later, headlines screamed across every news channel. Mafia boss Vittorio Santini declared dead in warehouse shootout. The media displayed images of body bags, police tape, experts speculating about power vacuums and gang wars. They showed an empty coffin being lowered into the grave in a private cemetery, frequented by dozens of grim-faced men in dark suits. But Elena knew the truth. In a safe house far away on the outskirts of Baia Nera, hidden in the hills where the air smelled of pine and the city seemed a distant memory, Vittorio woke up in clean, soft sheets. His eyes met hers immediately. She had been sitting in vigil in a chair beside him for 5 days, refusing to leave except when absolutely necessary. "You keep dying, Mr. Santini," she said, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were falling. He reached slowly, shuddering at the force of the stitches, and brushed her cheek with his thumb. His touch was warm, truly alive. "And you keep bringing me back." He sat up carefully, and Elena helped him, adjusting the pillows, bothering him in a way that made him smile. Together, they looked out the window at the tranquil hills, at the world that had suddenly become peaceful, that had stopped trying to kill them. "It's over," Vittorio said softly. "Moretti is gone. His operation is scattered. The remaining men swore allegiance or disappeared." He paused. "The city is ours, if we want it. He turned to look at her, really look at her, and the intensity of his gaze took her breath away. You saved my life, Elena. You saved my men. You stopped me from becoming the same monster Moretti was. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. You're not a waitress anymore. You never were. Then what am I? My reason, she whispered. He lifted her hand to his lips, gently kissing her knuckles. Reason for everything. To change. To desire something better. To believe that something better is possible. Outside, his men stood guard, but now it was different. They weren't there out of fear or obligation. They watched over the secure house with something that felt like devotion, whispering amongst themselves about the woman who defied a brutal employer, who risked everything to save her leader, who somehow made him want to be better than he was. And somewhere beyond the ocean that had once taken him, dawn broke again, golden and silent and full of possibilities. Vittorio slid his arm around Elena's waist, pulling her close until her head rested against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive. You pulled me from the ocean, Elena, he murmured into her hair. But it wasn't the water that was drowning me. It was the world, the violence, the betrayal, the endless cycle of blood and revenge. You're the only thing that ever pulled me back to life, the only thing that made me want to be pulled back. She tilted her head up to look at him, and he was already looking down at her with an expression so tender that her throat tightened. And now? She asked. Now? He smiled. A genuine smile this time. Not the hardness she had seen before, but something soft and genuine and full of hope. Now we've discovered how to live, really live. No more wars, no more looking over our shoulders. Just life. You think it's that simple? No, he admitted, but I think it's possible. With you, I think anything is possible. She then kissed him, softly and slowly, savoring it like promises and new beginnings. Outside, the world kept turning, but in that moment, in that silent room in the hills, they had all the time in the world, and for the first time in years, for both of them, time seemed like a gift instead of a threat. The weeks that followed brought a kind of peace that neither of them had experienced before. Vittorio slowly recovered, his strength returning day by day. Elena remained by his side, learning that being seen, being valued, was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. Vittorio's men, who had previously served out of obligation or fear, now served for something different, true loyalty, respect, and a kind of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, their world could be different. Marco became not only Vittorio's right-hand man, but a friend. He brought news from the outside world, reports on how the city was adjusting to the shift in power. Moretti's illicit businesses were dismantled piece by piece. Vittorio directed resources toward more legitimate things, restaurants, import businesses, investments that didn't require blood as payment. People are talking, Marco said one morning, bringing fresh coffee. They say you've grown weak, that a woman has softened you. Vittorio looked at Elena, who was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The morning light enveloped her like a halo, and he felt something tighten in his chest, something I would have previously called weakness. Now he knew it was the only real strength he had ever possessed. Let them talk, Vittorio said calmly. Weak men confuse violence with power, cruelty with strength. I've made that mistake for too long. Sophia had recovered as well. Physical scars would heal. Emotional ones would take longer, but she visited frequently, bringing with her a lightness that the safe house needed. She and Elena would talk for hours, laughing at things that women who survive the impossible laugh at, things that men like Vittorio would never fully understand, but were grateful for. One afternoon, as the sun set, painting the sky orange and purple, Elena and Vittorio walked through the hills, just the two of them. No guards, no weapons. Apenas duas pessoas que haviam encontrado ao outro na escuridão e se recusado a soltar. Você sente falta? Helena perguntou suavemente. Do quê? Da adrenalina, do poder, de ser temido. Vittorio considerou a pergunta por um longo momento. Não, ele disse finalmente. Eu achava que aquilo me definia, que sem a violência, sem o medo, eu não seria nada. Mas eu estava errado. Ele parou, virando-se para ela, pegando as duas mãos nas dele. Você me mostrou que há algo mais, algo melhor. Uma vida que vale a pena viver, não apenas sobreviver. Lágrimas brilharam nos olhos de Helena. Eu era apenas uma garçonete. Não, ele disse firmemente. Você nunca foi só nada. Você era a mulher mais corajosa que já conheci. Você pulou em um oceano furioso para salvar um estranho. Você arriscou tudo sem pensar 2 vezes. Você me viu não como um criminoso, não como um chefe, mas como um homem que merecia viver. Ele tocou o rosto dela suavemente. Você me salvou de mais do que apenas o oceano, Helena. Você me salvou de mim mesmo. Ela se inclinou para o toque dele, fechando os olhos. Eu te amo, sussurrou. As primeiras palavras que ela já havia dito. As palavras mais verdadeiras que já havia falado. Eu sei, ele respondeu, sua voz embargada. E eu te amo, mais do que pensei ser possível. Eles permaneceram lá enquanto o sol desaparecia completamente, envolvidos na escuridão crescente, mas sentindo-se mais seguros do que jamais se sentiram, porque eles tinham um ao outro, e isso era o suficiente. Meses se transformaram em 1 ano. A casa segura nas colinas se tornou um lar. Vitório legitimou seus negócios completamente, transformando o império que Moretti construiu sobre sangue em algo que poderia resistir à luz do dia. O Marea Blue, onde Helena trabalhou por tantos anos, foi comprado por Vitório, não para controlá-lo, mas para dá-lo. A Helena. É seu, disse ele uma manhã, colocando as escrituras na mesa de café da manhã. Para fazer o que quiser. Helena olhou para os papéis, atordoada. Vitório, eu não posso. Pode, ele insistiu. Você merece algo que é seu, algo que ninguém pode tirar. Transforme-o no que quiser. Um restaurante melhor, um abrigo, uma escola de culinária, o que seu coração desejar. Ela olhou para ele com lágrimas nos olhos. Como eu tive tanta sorte de encontrar você. Sorte? Ele sorriu. Eu sou o sortudo, Helena. Você me tirou de um oceano. Agora me tire desta vida antiga completamente. Me mostre como viver de verdade. E ela fez. Juntos, eles transformaram o Marea Blue em algo novo. Um lugar onde pessoas como Helena, pessoas que trabalharam duro e foram invisíveis por muito tempo, pudessem aprender habilidades, ter oportunidades, serem vistas. Sofia se tornou a gerente. Marcos surpreendeu a todos ao se revelar um chefe talentoso, assumindo a cozinha. O restaurante prosperou, não por medo ou obrigação, mas porque era construído sobre algo real: respeito, comunidade, esperança. Nas noites tranquilas, quando o restaurante fechava e todos iam para casa, Helena e Vitório caminhavam pela praia. A mesma praia onde tudo começou. Onde ela o puxou das ondas e mudou ambas as suas vidas para sempre. Você já se arrepende? Vitório perguntou uma noite, observando as ondas quebrarem suavemente na areia. De me salvar? Helena pegou sua mão, entrelaçando seus dedos. Nunca, nem por um segundo. Mesmo com tudo que veio depois, a violência, o perigo, a guerra, especialmente por causa de tudo isso, ela disse firmemente, porque significou algo, porque você escolheu ser melhor, porque juntos criamos algo bonito de algo feio. Ele a puxou para perto, beijando o topo de sua cabeça. Eu passaria por tudo novamente, 1000 vezes, se significasse encontrar você no final. As ondas continuaram quebrando. O oceano continuou seu ritmo eterno. Mas para 2 sobreviventes que se recusaram a deixar a escuridão vencer, o som não era mais ameaçador. Era pacífico. Um lembrete de onde eles vieram. E o quão longe eles chegaram. 2 anos depois do resgate, em uma manhã ensolarada que parecia abençoada pelos céus, Vitório ajoelhou na mesma praia onde quase morreu. Helena estava ao lado dele, confusa, até que ele tirou uma pequena caixa do bolso. Helena Torres, disse ele, sua voz firme mas cheia de emoção. Você me tirou da morte. Você me deu razão para viver. Você me mostrou que homens como eu podem mudar, podem ser melhores, podem amar. Ele abriu a caixa, revelando um anel simples mas lindo. Me dê a honra de passar o resto da minha vida provando que fui digno de ser salvo. Case-se comigo. Lágrimas corriam livremente pelo rosto de Helena. Sim, ela sussurrou. 1000 vezes sim. Quando ele deslizou o anel em seu dedo, o oceano parecia aplaudir, ondas quebrando em ritmo celebratório. Marco e Sofia, escondidos atrás das rochas, saíram aplaudindo e rindo. Os homens de Vitório, posicionados discretamente ao redor do perímetro, sorriram. Alguns até limparam os olhos discretamente. O casamento foi pequeno, íntimo, realizado na pequena igreja no topo das colinas, com vista para o oceano e a cidade abaixo. Helena usou um vestido simples, mas lindo. Vitório usou seu melhor terno, o coração mais leve do que jamais estivera. Quando o padre perguntou se ele aceitava Helena como sua esposa, Vitório não hesitou. Aceito, hoje e para sempre. Quando perguntaram a Helena, Ela olhou nos olhos de Vitório e viu toda a jornada deles refletida ali. A escuridão, o perigo, o amor que cresceu de circunstâncias impossíveis. Aceito, disse ela, sua voz clara e certa. Com todo o meu coração. O beijo que selou seus votos foi testemunhado por aqueles que os amavam, e por um oceano que uma vez tentou separá-los, mas agora parecia abençoá-los. A vida que construíram juntos não foi perfeita. Houve desafios, momentos em que o passado de Vitório ameaçava voltar, momentos em que Helena duvidava se poderia realmente ser a esposa de um homem com tal história. Mas cada vez que as dúvidas surgiam, eles se lembravam. Eles se lembravam da praia, do oceano, da escolha de pular, da escolha de salvar, da escolha de amar, mesmo quando tudo parecia impossível. E cada vez, eles escolhiam um ao outro novamente. 3 anos depois do resgate, Helena descobriu que estava grávida. A notícia a encheu de alegria e terror em igual medida. Como ela criaria uma criança? Como poderia trazer uma vida nova a um mundo que quase tirou Vitório dela? Mas Vitório a segurou naquela noite, mãos suavemente em sua barriga, olhos cheios de admiração e amor. Nosso filho, ele sussurrou. Uma nova geração. Uma que crescerá em um mundo melhor porque nós o fizemos melhor. Você tem certeza que podemos fazer isso? Helena perguntou, vulnerabilidade em sua voz. Podemos ser bons pais? Você, disse Vitório firmemente, já é a pessoa mais forte e gentil que conheço. Você será uma mãe incrível. E eu? Ele fez uma pausa, emoção cruzando seu rosto. Eu passarei cada dia tentando ser o pai que essa criança merece. Não o homem que fui, mas o homem que você me ajudou a me tornar. Quando sua filha nasceu, em uma manhã clara de primavera, eles a chamaram de Luna, pela luz que ela trouxe, pelo novo começo que representava. Vitório segurou a pequena Luna em seus braços, este homem que uma vez comandou um império de violência, e lágrimas correram livremente por seu rosto. Ela é perfeita, ele sussurrou. Ela é nossa, Helena respondeu, tocando suavemente a bochecha de sua filha. Ela é nosso futuro. Luna cresceu cercada por amor. Ela cresceu conhecendo Marco como tio Marco, que sempre trazia doces e a fazia rir. Ela conheceu Sofia como tia Sofia, que contava as melhores histórias. Ela cresceu nos negócios que seus pais construíram. Negócios honestos. Negócios baseados em trabalho duro e integridade. E à noite, quando ela estava na cama, Vitório e Helena frequentemente caminhavam até o quarto dela, observando-a dormir. Ela nunca saberá, Helena sussurrou uma noite. Sobre como você era, sobre como nos conhecemos, Vitório considerou. Um dia, quando for velha o suficiente, contaremos a ela, não todos os detalhes, mas a verdade, que pessoas podem mudar, que o amor pode salvar, que mesmo nas situações mais escuras, a esperança pode existir. Ele olhou para Helena, que sua mãe é a mulher mais corajosa do mundo. Os anos passaram como páginas virando. Luna cresceu forte e gentil, com o espírito de sua mãe e a determinação de seu pai. O Maré Blue prosperou, expandindo para vários locais. O programa de treinamento que Helena criou ajudou centenas de pessoas como ela, pessoas que precisavam de uma chance a encontrar suas vocações. Vitório se tornou respeitado não por medo, mas por suas contribuições para a comunidade. Ele financiou escolas, programas de jovens, projetos que deram às crianças de Baianera oportunidades que ele nunca teve, e através de tudo, Helena e Vitório permaneceram sólidos, ainda apaixonados, ainda gratos por aquela noite em que destino e escolha colidiram em uma praia escura. Em seu 20º aniversário de casamento, eles voltaram para aquela praia, mais velhos agora, cabelos de Vitório com fios de prata, rugas de riso em volta dos olhos de Helena. Mas o amor entre eles era tão forte quanto sempre foi. 20 anos, disse Helena, olhando para o oceano. Você já pensou naquela noite que estaríamos aqui? Naquela noite, disse Vitório. Eu não estava pensando, estava morrendo. Mas então você pulou e mudou tudo. Ele se virou para ela, pegando ambas as mãos. Você não salvou apenas minha vida, Helena. Você me deu uma vida que valia a pena salvar. Nós salvamos um ao outro. Ela corrigiu. Você me deu coragem. Você me mostrou que eu era mais do que apenas uma garçonete invisível. Você sempre foi mais. Ele insistiu. Eu apenas ajudei você a ver. Eles ficaram lá enquanto o sol se punha, pintando o céu em tons de ouro e rosa. O oceano, que uma vez foi um lugar de quase morte, agora era um lugar de lembrança, de gratidão, de amor que sobreviveu ao impossível. Luna os encontrou lá mais tarde, agora uma jovem mulher de 20 anos, estudando para ser médica. Vocês sempre vêm aqui, ela disse, juntando-se a eles. Por quê? Helena e Vitório trocaram um olhar. Por quê? Disse Helena suavemente. Este é o lugar onde tudo começou, onde seu pai quase morreu, acrescentou Vitório, e onde sua mãe me salvou. Luna olhou para o oceano, entendimento surgindo em seus olhos. E onde vocês decidiram viver? Sim, disseram ambos juntos. Há 3 ficaram lá, uma família forjada em circunstâncias extraordinárias, mantida por amor ordinário e extraordinário ao mesmo tempo. E enquanto as ondas continuavam seu ritmo eterno, eles sabiam que não importa quão escuras as águas ficassem, não importa quão forte a tempestade, eles sempre escolheriam pular, sempre escolheriam salvar, sempre escolheriam amor, porque no final, o amor foi a única coisa que realmente importou, a única coisa que valeu a pena lutar, a única coisa que transformou uma garçonete e um chefe da máfia em 2 pessoas que encontraram redenção nos braços um do outro. E isso, eles sabiam, era o maior resgate de todos, não da morte, mas para a vida. 30 years have passed since that night when the ocean nearly took Vittorio Santini. 30 years since an unseen waitress decided that some lives are worth saving. Even when every instinct screams at you to run, the beach in Baia Nera still looks the same. The waves still break with the same force. The wind still carries the taste of salt. But everything has changed. Where once there was only darkness and violence, now there is the Elena Torres Institute, a school that offers free vocational training to young people from underprivileged communities. Hundreds of lives transformed. Hundreds of people who have found their calling, just as Elena found hers on that fateful night. Vittorio Santini, now with completely white hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, walks along the beach hand in hand with Elena. They do this every morning. A ritual, a memory, a silent gratitude to the fate that united them in such a brutal and beautiful way. Luna, her daughter, is now a cardiologist at the city's main hospital. She has saved countless lives, carrying on the legacy of a mother who never hesitated to jump into the darkest waters to rescue a stranger. Do you regret it? Vittorio asks suddenly, looking at the horizon where the sun is beginning to rise, painting the sky gold and pink. Elena squeezes his hand tighter, smiling. Which part? Jumping? Loving you? Building this life? Either one of them. Not for a second, she replies, turning to look him in the eyes. Do you know what I learned that night, Vittorio? That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's jumping even when every instinct screams not to. It's choosing love when hate would be easier. It's believing that people can change, even when the whole world says it's impossible. Vittorio pulls her close, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that only years can bring. You didn't just save my life, Elena. You saved my soul. They remain there, 2 survivors who refuse to let the darkness win, watching the sunrise. The ocean is no longer a threat. It's a promise of new beginnings, of second chances, of love that survives the impossible. Because in the end, no matter how deep the waters, no matter how strong the storm, there will always be someone willing to jump in. There will always be someone who chooses to save instead of abandon. There will always be love where it is least expected. And that, my dear friends, is the only truth that truly matters. Thank you for listening. I am immensely grateful to each of you who dedicated your time to embark on this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Elena's place? Until the next story, continue believing in the power of love and courage.